Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sweatpants BI. This is part 3 of our full-length HR report walkthrough. In this video, now that we've done most of the DAX that we're going to need in this report, not all of it, we're going to start actually visualizing the measures that we've written so far. There will be a little bit more DAX throughout this course, but having headcount, retention, turnover already calculated, that takes a lot of the pressure off. That takes a lot of the DAX work off the table so that we can start focusing on some of the fun stuff, which for me is always visualizing the data and of course doing our layouts and design. So in this video, which is a little bit longer, we're going to be spending some time actually visualizing all three metrics across a wide range of different visuals to give a hypothetical audience or stakeholder different views on these three metrics that will hopefully help them understand things like employee retention and turnover at this fake company with this fake HR data. So looking forward to jumping into the visuals. Let's get to it. So now that we've calculated enough of our DAX measures to go ahead and get started, we can start thinking about how we're going to lay out this HR headcount tool. So, the first page probably makes sense to just sort of give a potential company or audience of this tool an overall perspective of where headcount stands today, or at the very least at the most recent data point or time frame that we're interested in looking at. So this first page of the report is really just going to be a summary of our headcount measure that we've created over here. After that, we're going to need a page that really focuses on our very important employee retention measure. And then maybe we want to reserve a page as well for kind of assessing turnover over time and across different dimensions of our data set. And I'm also just going to go ahead and add a placeholder here for the eventual cover page or landing page where people will enter into this tool. So we're going to start out with our headcount page. And all we're going to be doing in this video is just kind of laying out some of the data visuals for this page. We're not going to be focused yet on making things look pretty. We're not going to be focused yet on data storytelling elements. Really, we're just trying to get our core visuals onto the page. And of course, the most important visual for this headcount page is going to be to just have an overall number of our headcount somewhere on the page where it's super easy to find. And this is going to sort of contextualize the rest of the visuals on this page. It's going to sort of contextualize all of the other visuals that we're going to make, because we're going to take this number and we're going to basically carve it up and visualize it by different dimensions from our data set over here. Things like department, demographics like age, race, and gender, and maybe even things like locations, like where are these employees based. So we are definitely going to need some sort of call out of our overall head count. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of, while I'm here, knock down the font size of that just a little bit. Another thing that we're going to need on this page, and in fact on all of the pages of this report, is I'm going to go ahead and add just a year slider here, because if you'll remember, several of the measures that we have created, like retention in particular, are dependent on us setting a time frame, right? Because we're calculating retention relative to a specific point in time. That enables us to track retention by year, 2012 all the way through 2023. So we want to make sure that we always have front and center some way for our audience to know exactly which time frame we're looking at here. And in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and rewind this measure all the way back to, let's go ahead and just set it to 2019. Now, let's go ahead and start adding some visuals to our page here. But first, let's go ahead and just look over here at our dimension tables that are set up in the data model, and let's start asking ourselves, what kinds of things go together here? And if we look through our tables over here, you can see that we have a demographic dimension, which is things like age, gender, race of employees. We have departments, which are where the employees or our headcount are working within the company. We have things like the level of education employees have attained. We have things like job level, which tells us, how many employees are CEO, which is usually just one. How many are directors, individual contributors, which tend to make up the largest percentage of headcount within a company. How many are managers and how many are team leads. And then we also have things like the reporting structure or manager structure of the company, things like marital dimension, marital status, married or single. And we also have some information about why employees left the company. So in my opinion, when we're looking at this head count, we can kind of draw an imaginary line through the middle of this report where we can probably on the left reserve visuals to take this headcount number and break it down by dimensions within the business. In other words, like department, where employees are located, what type of worker they are, whether or not they're remote or they actually come into the office and work on site. And then we can also have a huge summary area over here where we're breaking down employees by their respective demographics, by things like gender, age, education, and race. So that's how I'm going to kind of frame this report as I'm dropping these visuals onto the page. So the first visual that I'm going to just kind of drop in here is going to take my headcount measure, and I'm going to break down the 2,796 employees here by department. And you can see there it is. So it looks like I've got 543 employees in software, 417 in sales. And then I also have this sub-department layer here. So if I want to drill into sales, for example, I can see that it looks like I've got 143 employees in sales account management, 141 in sales business development, and another 133 in sales operations. So we're giving employees the ability to drill up and down into this bar chart here that sums up our headcount for different departments within the company. And all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to copy and paste that visual. And instead of doing department and sub-department, let's go ahead and also include a breakdown of all of our employees by job level so that we can see, once again, most of our employees are individual contributors. Looks like about 2,094, which is a huge chunk of this 2,796. And next, I'm going to go ahead and drop down here instead, and I'm going to add an additional visual. And this is just going to be a stacked bar chart. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of department and sub-department again. And maybe I'm in a situation where I want to know what percentage of our employees are coming into the office or are working remote. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my location field over here. And I'm going to drop that into my legend so that I can see, it looks like I've got about almost 80% of my employees are remote, but I do have about 20% that work on site. And to sort of go with that, let's go ahead and also grab our city field from our data. And here I want to size my map according to head count, of course. So let's go ahead and add head count to our bubble size so that I can zoom in and see, okay, it looks like a lot of my employees are based in San Francisco and LA, and the rest are kind of scattered all over the country. Looks like there's a pretty big pocket over here in Texas as well. So the other half of my report, I'm going to kind of reserve this for just sort of breaking down the demographic information about these 2,796 employees in my head count as of 2019. So I'm going to go ahead and just first, let's go ahead and grab our demographic table. And let's go ahead and grab gender here. And let's go ahead and drop headcount in here. You can see that, most of my employees identify as male and female. And then I have another 8, which either don't identify as either one, or maybe they just didn't enter their gender or something into the hypothetical HR system for this company. I really don't know what the other category is in this specific data set, but hey, it's there, it's visible. So since we only have 3 values within our gender category, let's just go ahead and make that a donut chart, which will allow us to see that other makes up a very, very small portion, but we can at least see that it looks like, the majority of the employees in this headcount are male. And we have a fairly large percentage, just north of 44%, that are female. So let's just go ahead and include that there. And then I'm actually going to copy and paste this visual. And maybe we just want to test out and see how this same visual looks but for our race field. And, overall, it looks like our race category is distributed enough for this to be an relatively easy visual to read. But as a rule, when dealing with donut charts, I tend not to go with donut charts if there are more than 4 or 5 values. So to get a little bit more creative with how we visualize this, I'm going to go ahead and make this a horizontal 100% stacked bar chart. And let's go ahead and just change our race category from the y-axis to our legend. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull this down here right below our gender donut chart. And next, I'm going to go ahead and add another bar chart here. What I'm trying to do is keep all of my demographic fields kind of together in one section. So since I've got gender here and race here, I'm going to go ahead and grab age. Whoops, wrong visual. I'm going to go ahead and grab age and put it in my x-axis, head count, put that in my y-axis, so that I can also show a distribution of my employees according to their age. So it looks like, a lot of my employees are kind of between their mid-20s and maybe mid-40s. So I've got 3 demographic visuals here, and I've got enough room for maybe one more down here at the bottom. So let's go ahead and grab our education field, and let's go ahead and add that down here. And maybe you decide you want to just make that a horizontal bar chart. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that here. And we have just a little bit of space remaining here. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab another donut chart. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my marital status field. And I'm just going to add that to the lower right corner so you can see what percentage of employees within the company are single or married. And I also noticed when I copied that chart that it looks like age is still kind of stuck here layered under my gender, which of course was an accident. So let's just go ahead and delete that from my legend. And now I've at least got, enough visuals on here to sort of get me started when I eventually decide to clean this up and reformat these visuals. I'm feeling pretty confident that this is a good place to start for my headcount page. So now let's go ahead and turn our attention next to our retention page. Now we're going to build our retention page. And once again, the first thing that we're going to need to do on our retention page is add a year slicer. And the reason for that is that if you will remember, within our retention measure, which of course is our ending headcount divided by our starting headcount for any time period within our data, you'll remember that everything is relative to our hire date being before whatever first date we're looking at, and our term date being blank or later than the first time period that we're looking at. And what this means is that our starting headcount and our ending headcount are both completely dependent on us defining our time frame. So if I just drop my retention measure onto the page without any kind of slicer sort of limiting the time period that we're looking at, I'm going to end up with a completely blank card here. And the reason for that is that when I don't have anything else on the page, of course, that means that my time period starts in the first year of the data set, which is 2012. And of course, we can't calculate retention for 2012 because that's when we started hiring our very first employees. And for the retention calculation, it's dependent on having employees at the beginning and then tracking those employees and making sure that they're still present at the end of whatever time period that you're looking at. So the reason that retention is currently blank or 0 is because if it goes all the way back to 2012, we didn't even have any employees yet. So that means that there were no employees to retain by definition. So let's go ahead and grab our year slider over here. And I'm going to go ahead and just drag that over here, and I'm going to go ahead and sync it, which means that any adjustments that someone makes to this slider on other pages will also be reflected on this page. So sure, let's go ahead and just sync this. And in order to get our retention measure to work, we're going to need to slide our years past 2012 and into 2013 so that we actually have employees to look at. So let's go ahead and set our time frame from 2013 to 2019. And that means that the retention calculation that's currently coming up here is calculating what percentage of employees that were hired prior to 2013. In other words, what percentage of employees who were present on January 1st, 2013 are still present at the end of 2019. And this might look a little bit low, 83.6%, but I can tell you that this is pretty good retention. That means that that almost 84% of the employees that were present at this company in 2013 are still there more than 5 years later. So that's pretty dang good. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of keep this card right here to always remind us what our overall retention is for this time frame. And of course, if we decide we don't want to look at such a large time frame and we just want to look at 2019, you can see for 2019 it's 97.3%, for 2018 96.6%. So once again, this company's got pretty stellar retention overall. So now let's go ahead and start adding some additional visuals that might be interesting to look at here. And the first thing that we might want to look at is, let's go ahead and grab a bar chart here. And let's go ahead and add year from our date table. And let's go ahead and add our retention measure to the y-axis. And you can see, we're tracking retention over time. I'm pretty sure that this data set is just a randomized data set. Looking at it, I'm pretty confident that this is not, any kind of data set derived from a real company. This is probably a data set that someone created based off of just random interval data. And that's why you can see there's not a whole lot of variability in our retention measure. In fact, it looks like it just gets better and better. So we started at about 92.9% in 2013, and then as we added more employees, pretty well stabilizes around 96 to 97%. So in a standard bar chart, it's kind of hard to see any variance over time. So, we might want to flirt with, trying something like a line chart just to, sort of do a better job of emphasizing the change over time, as retention increases. Of course, some people are going to say, well, you should always zero out your y-axis. I don't necessarily agree with that 100% of the time. We can go ahead and try it out to see what it looks like. But if we zero out our y-axis, honestly, it's even, it's still just as difficult to sort of tell what the long-term trend is here with our retention. So instead, something that we might want to consider when we're building this report is to just go with a line chart, but make sure that we deliberately call out the fact that our y-axis does not start at 0 so that someone who's jumping into this report for the first time doesn't look at this visual and think that retention, got as low as almost 0% and is now increasing to, near 100%. The y-axis here is extremely important, but fortunately it's also something that we can disclose in our notes when we start, sort of cleaning up this report. So to sort of round things out here, I've got a nice space down here, and of course I'm trying to kind of keep everything in this area sort of aligned with what I've got up here. So I think I can probably fit about 2 visuals down here. Let's go ahead and just grab job level and department. And let's go ahead and add retention to both of these. And I'm going to go ahead and just make this a bar chart for retention by job level. And let's just make this another bar chart, or if you want, a horizontal bar chart, just to sort of add a little bit of a visual diversity to the page. That looks all right to me. And then for this section, we're going to wrestle with the fact that there are all kinds of things over here that someone might hypothetically want to compare retention for. Maybe the HR manager tells you, I really need to be able to track retention for, any given time frame by all of these demographic variables. I need to be able to track it by department, by education level, by marital status for some reason. So obviously we're dealing with a whole bunch of different levels or layers that someone might need to be able to slice and dice retention, but we've only got this much room here. And maybe we also decide that visually we don't want everything to look exactly like this page. So instead of doing it that way, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage a really cool feature that I love in Power BI called field parameters, which are located up here in the modeling tab. Just go to new parameter and we're going to create a field parameter. But first, one more thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a bin for my ages. In other words, instead of having all of my ages just listed from 21 to 66, let's go ahead and create some age groups instead. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab my age column, and I'm going to create a new group. And all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to list all of my values. And first, I'm going to grab all of the values here that are in their 20s. Then I'm going to grab all of my values that are in their 30s. Then I'm going to grab everything in the 40s, everything in the 50s, and everything in the 60s in order to create my groups. Once I have my 5 age groups, I'm just going to go up here and click on the first group, and I'm going to call this 20 to 29. The next one is going to be 30 to 39. And I'm just double clicking here. Then 40 to 49, 50 to 59, 60 to 69, even though I'm pretty sure that our ages stop at 66 if memory serves. And let's go ahead and call this new grouping column that we're creating, let's just go ahead and call that age group. And now you can see my age group over here. Let's go ahead and test it out. Seems to be working. And you can see not a whole lot of variance across the different age groups, but it does appear to be working just fine. Now that we have an age group to help us summarize that age information a little bit more easily, let's go ahead and head back up to modeling, and we're going to grab new parameter and select fields. And after this comes up, let's go ahead and pick out everything that we want to add to our field parameters. And this is super simple. Again, we're adding things to this add and reorder fields. I definitely want that age group column that I just created. I want gender, I want race. Then I also want department. I want education. I want job level. I want location. And let's go ahead and grab marital status as well. And once you have all of these, you can also reorder them, within this section. And this is going to determine the order that these values are listed in the slicer that's going to be created when we hit create. So instead of layering them the way that I selected them, I'm going to do this by department, then location, then job level, and then let's do age group, gender, race, marital status, and we'll leave education last. And then it's asking me, of course, if I want to add a slicer to this page. In this case, we are definitely going to want that. When I'm done, let's just go ahead and hit create. And immediately you can see that I now have a slicer that has appeared here, and it's listed in the order that, of course, I dragged and dropped those fields when I was creating the parameter. Now you will notice over here that I've got a combination of kind of lowercase, I've got an underscore here and here, age group, everything's capitalized. So let's go over here on the right where our parameter was created, and I'm just going to click on the parameter. And by creating this field parameter item, Power BI took care of all of the DAX and configuration of this field parameter for me. So you can see it's basically, pulling things from my data, and then the order over here, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the order of those fields, of course, is the order that I dropped those fields when I was creating the field parameter. So that's all that these numbers are. They're just determining the sequence that items appear in the slicer over here. And then the values in the slicer are really just aliases being given to those fields. So I'm just going to go in here real quickly, and I'm just going to capitalize the names that Power BI automatically generated for these items, just so that everything looks a little bit cleaner. So now everything is capitalized. I'm just going to go ahead and click back over here, and you can see now everything in the slicer is uppercase, and everything looks completely standardized. So let's go ahead now and turn this from a vertical list into a drop down. And the first thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and click location will work. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create what is called a slope chart. And a slope chart is basically just a specific variant of the line chart. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to add year to our x-axis, and we're going to grab our parameter, and we're going to add our parameter, which is this field here that was created within the parameter table. And we're going to drag that into our legend. And the error here is totally fine. It's just giving us an error because we haven't actually added any kind of measure here. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and drop retention into my y-axis. And you can see that it's automatically creating a visual demonstrating changes in retention for on-site employees and retention by year. So this is totally fine. This is about what I was expecting. And notice that with field parameters, if we instead decide that we don't want to look at location, but we want to look at job level, we just select job level, and now we're looking at the same measure, but for a different dimension from our data set. So this is what makes field parameters so cool. Or if I don't want to look at job level and I want to look at marital status, or I want to look at race, or I want to look at gender, all of that becomes extremely easy with field parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it back on location for now. And again, currently this is not a slope chart. For a slope chart, we're really just going to be looking at how do these lines change for the entire time period. In other words, how does the line look if we're just comparing the first point in time with the last point in time? So we're going to just create a new measure. You can call this whatever you want to, but basically it's just going to be a new measure that references our retention measure. but kind of mixes it up a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this min-max retention. And we're going to add, even though I'm using switch, this is still essentially just if-then kind of logic. I want to switch what happens when a certain criteria is true here. And the first criteria is when the selected value, in other words, the selected values over here in my year slicer or the selected value over here in my visual, when the selected year that is being analyzed in this visual is equal to whatever the minimum year is that is currently being evaluated for the entire data set or the entire date table, then I want you to show retention. And what this is going to do here is it's going to basically return retention just for the first year that is being returned by the current state of my report page here, which if you'll look over here is 2013. And if you want to test this first, let me go ahead and just cut that for now. And let me just go ahead and show you exactly how the min year part of the calculation is working. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if the selected year equals the minimum year for the entire page with my slicer applied over here, then 1 else 0. So let's go ahead and get rid of my parameter from the legend. Let's go ahead and get rid of retention from the y-axis, and let's go ahead and just drop this measure that I created into the chart here. And you can see that I have 1 returned when the selected year is equal to the minimum year for the data set, which is 2013 because of these slicers. And of course, it's 0 for everything else. And if I move this slicer to 2014, notice that now 2014 is 1. If I change it to 2015, 2015 is 1, and so on and so forth. So now let's go ahead and rebuild this visual over here. I'm going to drag parameter back into the legend. And let's go ahead and continue changing all of this. And so instead of returning 1, what I want to do is return my retention measure when the year being evaluated over here is 2013. The next part of this is super easy. We're just going to tell this measure that we only want retention returned when the date is also equal to the maximum date over here, which of course is 2019. If neither conditions are true, we really just want to return blank. So what's happening now is instead of returning retention for each year, we're just returning retention for 2013 and 2019, or 2013 and 2018, or 2014 and 2018. And so you can see that this is dynamically changing based on the time frame that we have selected. And you can see that it looks like for 2013 and 2019 that on-site retention has been pretty flat. Looks like it's 97% to 98%. From 2013 to 2019, remote retention has actually increased pretty significantly from a low of 92% to a high of 97%. So now we're going to go over here real quickly, and we're also going to turn on series labels for this new visual here. And we're also going to change our x-axis from continuous, which is showing all of these years. We don't necessarily want to show all of the years because it could give someone the mistaken impression that 2014 is here, 2016 is here, 2018 is here, when in fact, we're just looking at 2013 and 2019 for this slope chart. So we can get around showing years that we're not actually calculating data for by just turning this to a categorical x-axis instead of a continuous one. And you can see that that did cause a bug where we're now showing 2019 first and then 2013. That's no problem. We're just going to click on the three dots up here, go to our sort axis, and we're going to resort by year and in ascending order. And so now we've got 2013 and 2019. And so now that we have our slope chart configured, we can go ahead and test this on some other data points, such as department, job level, and you can see it looks like our director retention has gone down quite a bit in that time frame. We've got our age groups here, which it looks like are all moving, in a very positive direction. Gender, race, and marital status, and education. And of course, since we've turned on series labels, maybe it's a little bit redundant to have our legend turned on. So we're just going to go ahead and flip our legend off for now. And one other thing that we need to do is we need to convert our new retention measure to a percentage. And with that, we're now done with our dynamic retention page. Now, something that I didn't do on the retention page that could be useful for your audience, if you think that something like the retention measure could confuse them or trip them up the first time, is to also show some of the measures that make up the calculation. So even though I don't necessarily have as much room as I might have liked for it, we could add some additional cards here. And I'm going to go ahead and add my starting head count to the first and my ending head count to the last. And let's go ahead and just decrease the size enough that we can maybe just barely manage to kind of fit these into this area. And of course, once again, we're going to go through and sort of clean everything up here later in the class. For now, we're just getting everything roughly where we intend for it to be in the final version of the report. But the reason that I decided to circle back and maybe start to include some of these items is because turnover is another example of a metric that might be a little bit confusing to your average layman consumer of the report. So maybe you're also deciding to take a very similar approach for turnover. And you can say, sure, maybe you want to sync the year slicer again, but maybe you want to add turnover as a card here. And it says 28.5% turnover for the time frame from 2013 to 2019. But how is someone going to know what goes into that 28.5%? Well, maybe you want to have a card that shows the total number of departing employees compared with the average number of employees during the time frame. And of course, logically, someone might be very curious, well, what does that even mean, average number of employees? Where you could also add some additional text or color here, which we may do when we get to the data storytelling component. Or the final design component for this lesson, just kind of explaining how we even get to this measure, because even though it might be fairly common sense or easily sort of interpreted by someone who works in HR, if this were like an enterprise facing tool where anyone from the company could jump in and look at it, they may not immediately know what goes into our particular company's turnover metric. So now that we have this area sort of staged, the next thing that we're going to do is we're really just going to kind of go through, our other pages and just grab some visuals that we've already created. And we're just going to go ahead and sort of retool these for our turnover metric. Maybe we decide that we would also like to track turnover over time. So let's go ahead and grab that. There we go. And for the second half of our page, let's try to mix things up just a little bit. And maybe what we're thinking is, maybe we want to try to add something like, a roster of all employees who have left the company. So let's go ahead and open up our fact table and let's grab full name and let's grab our departing employees measure so that we can filter this table dynamically to only show the departing employees within that time frame. And then let's go ahead and show also their term date or the date that they left the company. I'm going to go ahead and format that to be a short date. And maybe we also want to include something like their department. And if we kind of scrunch everything a little bit, we should be able to fit all of this information onto the page. And something else that we can do is change the name of our measure just within this table, maybe put it at the end. Or maybe we just decide that we want to call it count. Whoops. There we go. And maybe we want to sort this table by term date with the most recents first. And since we're now heavily focusing this page on employees who have left the company, maybe we also want to add just one bit more visual down here that kind of breaks down the different term types and term reasons. And you can see I've got a lot of values in term reasons, not so many in term type. So let's go ahead and just figure out a nice, sort of low real estate way of presenting this information. Normally, if I had a term type field that only has 2 values in it, I might really be thinking heavily about using something like a donut chart. However, a donut chart does take up a lot of valuable real estate here. So instead, I'm going to just pick a visual that does something very similar. And I'm going to use a horizontal stacked 100% bar chart again and move my term type from the y-axis to my legend. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that there. We can continue to sort of manipulate this table until it's, fitting the space that we have. And then maybe we also want to do a departing head count by term reason. And maybe we think a bar chart makes the most sense for that. And so there we go. Obviously, we're kind of recycling a lot of visual elements and stylistic choices that we made on the other 2 pages that we already created. So this turnover page, super short and sweet. We'll just go ahead and kind of leave it at that. Because, of course, now I'm just super, super eager to hop back over to PowerPoint and start putting together some of our layouts and incorporating, some more design and aesthetic elements into sort of the framework that we've laid out across these 3 pages so far.